All right, welcome everyone. We are so thrilled to have you here for our summer webinar in our Division 16 webinar series. And the topic of today's webinar is Art Therapy in Elementary Schools, overview of different art-based interventions and activities that promote better mental health in youth. And today we have with us Dr. Catherine Malbouf Portuguese. My French is not as good as,
perfect. It's good.
and she joins us from Bishop's University, and that is in Montreal. Is that correct?
It's in the Eastern Townships, but it's near Montreal. It's in Quebec.
Wonderful. So sorry, let me resume share. And I wanted to go ahead and do a brief introduction of our wonderful speaker. Sorry, reshare one more time before we get started with today's topic. So I just wanted to mention, as I'm pulling up our introductory slide, that if you're joining us today and you are hoping to receive continuing education units, there are a couple of steps to that process. The first is that you, of course, registered for the webinar, and that you also were able to submit payment through the PayPal link. We're still working on streamlining that process. But thank you so much for bearing with us as we navigate having that two-step process at the moment. The next thing is that once today's webinar is complete, we will go ahead and provide your certificates that you can then file and use for your certifications. This is going to be an interactive event. So those of you that are here with us live, our presenter has asked for you to be as involved as you feel comfortable in terms of asking questions and participating throughout. I'm here to moderate the chat and to acknowledge anyone who uses the hand raise feature of Zoom. You'll notice this is not a webinar platform, so we're all able to see and hear one another, and we encourage your participation. So we welcome our wonderful presenter, who's an associate professor at Bishop's University in Canada and holds an FRQS Young Scholar Junior 1 award. She's a licensed child psychologist and specializes in youth mental health, and a leading figure in mindfulness and youth research, art therapy, and philosophy for children in Quebec. I'm just going to go ahead and ask that folks mute themselves as we continue until you're participating. All right. She's also a PI and a co-PI on multiple grants that fund projects on children, mental health, and well-being in school settings. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and stop sharing and pass along the screen to our wonderful presenter, Dr. Malbouf Portuguese.
Thank you, Lindsay. You could have just said Catherine, it would have been fine, but I appreciate the effort. I'm going to share my own screen. And while this loads, I'm going to reiterate, well, first I'm going to say that, as you probably have guessed, that my mother tongue is not English, it's French. So if my grammar is wonky from time to time, first of all, you can absolutely ask me to rephrase. I will not be insulted at all. I work in an English environment, but nonetheless, I still think in French. So really, it's not a problem at all. If there's something that wasn't clear, or if I've translated something weird, please don't hesitate to stop me. And if you have questions as we go along, there's not many slides and there's not much information on the slides. So the more interactive this can be, the better it is for all of us, I think, and including for me. So yeah, I want to start by thanking the APA Division 16 for accepting my proposal. I'm super happy and honored to have been chosen to present a bit of my research and clinical work in school settings today, mainly about art. I used to be a school psychologist. I did my final internship in elementary schools. I've been a professor for quite a few years now, so I don't practice much, but all of my research has remained very, very clinical. if not to say solely clinical, and in elementary school settings. So my heart really is with the kids in elementary school. So to be here today is really special for me. So let's start this. I really wanted to have today's webinar not on research, but really on practical applications and give ideas and even brainstorm as a very large group about how we can use arts with the kids, either in individual settings or in group settings in schools, and to foster mental health, better mental health and communication, essentially. I'm going to start by saying that every image that you see in my presentation today is an art creation from one of the kids participating in our project. So it was really important for me to put them, to put the spotlight on them as I present what we do with them. And you'll see sometimes I seem to be switching gears or topics. I actually know what I'm talking about, but sometimes it sparks another idea and then I'll jump to something else. And again, if you're lost, if I'm talking too fast, if I'm mumbling, please don't hesitate to stop me. Okay, so today we'll see a lot of practical applications and we'll discuss how we use arts with the kids in school. Side note, so the Lego on this one is a self-portrait, which I find absolutely amazing. So one of the kids actually did that in a self-portrait exercise. Okay, so I have like 3 slides on research. It's very, very brief. I don't even talk of our own research, which I only realized this morning that I should have, but it's not important. You'll see you'll get the gist of it. So why do we use art or art therapy to foster better mental health in youth? Well, in clinical context, it will facilitate, encourage self-expression, discussions, even awareness of one's emotions, initially through this alternative means of communication, right? Because we're producing something sometimes instead of talking about it. However, I use art to discuss afterwards, right? So I'm sure no one is learning this right now. I'm sure a lot of you already use art in, for example, asking kids to draw their families and then discuss their families with them and open up that topic. It's basically the same thing. I've just gone a bit further down the road with it, where I use different forms of art to discuss sometimes difficult topics with the kids, or just to open up on various topics. So what we do know, there's not a ton of research on art therapy and art interventions for kids specifically, but what we do know is that it will encourage verbal expression of emotions. It will encourage easier communication of sometimes difficult emotions as well. I want to just make a little side note here to say that I'm not a licensed art therapist. I am a clinical psychologist, just like I'm guessing all of you or a lot of you, that uses art to facilitate the therapeutic process. Let's put it that way. Okay. So what we do know, again, it's like the second to last slide on research, but in hospital settings, what we do know is that art therapy or art interventions based in the arts show promise to improve mental health, overall quality of life, and decreases anxiety. And in situations where there is little to no control, children will often see the arts as giving them a sense of control, gaining back a sense of control. And we see that. So of course, if you have a chronic illness, that's a good example of this, but we've seen this in our own work on the COVID-19 pandemic, where we did implement art-based therapy at a distance, online with classrooms. It provided some challenges, but still, it gave them back this sense of control over a situation where there was no control, basically. So what we do know from research in schools, again, it's very, I'm gonna just move the windows because it's on top of my, oh, good, sorry. Okay, so what we do know from the research in school settings, it's mainly with specialized populations or special education classrooms. But again, they promote awareness, self-awareness, self-understanding of emotions in children with learning disabilities. We just finished this winter a project with children who were in language classrooms or who had significant language disabilities, and one could see why we chose arts to discuss and to open up on different topics where in cases where language can be more difficult, and we've seen the same results. Art can foster better emotional and social adjustment in school. And in a sample of autistic children, they did report that it decreased hyperactivity and internalizing behaviors while also increasing social skills. Oops, okay. So that was it. We're done with the research part. Now on to practical applications. So this is the, well, at any time, but this is the part where I would say, if you have questions about different practical applications, if you have insight about how you would do things or what questions you would ask, please don't hesitate to stop me. Okay, so the first activity I want to talk about is, well, first of all, I want to talk about using Legos, right? So when we think about art, we often think about fine arts, right? So drawing, painting, but we wanted to go much broader than that because not every kid likes to draw or to paint. And we could even discuss how once you're in school, usually drawing means kind of drawing inside the lines, right? Thinking inside the box. Abstract art kind of disappears from kids' radar once they start school. Obviously, we don't share that view. So if they want to do abstract things, we're more than happy to go along with them down that road. All of this to say, Lego was kind of used as a form of sculpture. So I'll also discuss other types of sculpture today. But it's a creative activity, basically. We're asking them to be creative and create a work of art with the bricks. So the first activity we tried with them was the self-portrait activity. And as you've seen right in the, I don't know, 5 minutes I've been talking, there were a lot of those pictures of Legos that were self-portraits, actually. Of course, like there's always a very basic introductory question. And then Lindsay mentioned it quickly earlier on, but I also do a lot of research on philosophy for children and try to adapt existential psychology, but for kids. And so I like to kind of put them both together in the sense of it would be easy to do a bit of existential psychology or existential therapy with the initial question and then move on to creating art, right? So what do you look like? And then we basically ask them to do a self-portrait using the Legos. I've tried to, when I thought about it, put in a few tips in terms of if you want to actually try this out with the kids. Buying a mix of different bricks is actually a good idea. So just like you can see on the slide. So you have like classic bricks that are of course essential. It's easier if you think to buy the plates that go underneath, because then the Legos they can stick onto something. And then the Lego dots are really neat because they offer a lot of this possibility for shapes and forms. And even if I go back, so that was another example of a self-portrait, but like even this one, you can see how they really went out and used various forms of bricks, even like the things that are supposed to be like trees, right? They use it for their ears and stuff. So it really provides more creativity, I find. And so if you have time, so the research that we do oftentimes is prevention research. So we go into classrooms and we do the activities with the full classrooms. Of course, all of these activities can be done on a one-to-one basis, right? If you have a kid in your office at school and then you want to do therapy with them and using arts, it's totally feasible. So if you have time, the activity that I kind of like to do is, first of all, how do they see themselves? So a self-portrait, but then how do other people see themselves? And then you could even use different types of art mediums to do both, right? So it could be, one can be a Lego, one could be a drawing. You can mix and match as you will. So I see there's people talking in the chat, but I'm gonna say, Lindsay, you're gonna stop me if need be. Okay, good.
Yeah, actually, if we do have a moment, just to go back for one
Absolutely.
second, there was a question about whether or not the PowerPoint slides would be able to be shared, just
Sure.
will impact folks's note-taking. Excellent.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I do have a question, and I wonder if others do as well. So when you're having, or in your experience, when you've had students engage in this specific example, are they talking you through what they're doing, or are they working and then you're facilitating a conversation about the art that they've done?
So typically in the group setting, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to kind of send them off to do the creation. It's not silent by any means. I mean, we circulate, we ask them questions, they can talk about what they're doing as they're doing it. But then following, like, let's say a typical, at least in Quebec, a typical school period in elementary school is like 50 minutes approximately. So we'll have a good 20 to 30 minutes for creation, and then a group discussion. And then they can show us, they can present us what they did and explain what it, like, why they chose that to do that, or what it represents. So yeah, there's definitely a discussion component to the art making. Yeah. Okay. So that was Lego self-portrait. We'll come back to Legos because they're my favorite, to be super honest. But we'll come back to Legos. I've tried to put in a different, different forms of art as we go along. So the second one I want to talk about is photo voice. And once again, like, the picture you see on the slide is an actual picture that a kid took in one of our projects to represent the beauty of nature. So photo voice in and of itself is a methodological approach in research. It's a research action approach where participants will be very active in either describing phenomena by taking pictures, and then organizing exhibits to be able to contact, like, the local political side of things, right? So they can exchange with people that are significant in their communities, etc. I'm certainly not against that part at all. I see in photo voice the fact that photography is a form of art, and so that's what I want to kind of delve further in when I use it. So some idea of themes. So as I've mentioned, beauty, it could be beauty at large, it could be beauty in nature, depending on the focus that you have. We'll discuss it a bit later on, but I do a lot of research on eco-anxiety as well. So we use a lot of photo voice in eco-anxiety research with the kids. Ugliness, climate change, and then you can basically have whatever theme that is of interest for example, for the kids' therapy, right? This is just the themes that we've been using. One thing that we need to take into consideration, even in non-research settings, is that if you plan on having an exhibit, for example, at the end of the process, you really have to discuss the ethical considerations ahead of time, right? So you have to kind of, if it's only you and the kid in your office and the pictures won't be going anywhere else, it's not the same issues. You don't necessarily have to ask them not to take pictures of other humans. But if you plan on doing an exhibit, then you kind of have to warn them ahead of time. We don't take pictures of other people because they might not want to be on the picture in an exhibit. Another example, so one of the kids took a picture of their dog. A little tip here, we use the Kidamento cameras. Personally, I purchased them on Amazon, but they're on their own website, and I think in the States they're probably available at many different venues, more than over here. It's a really nice camera, actually. It's super kid friendly. It doesn't break. They can drop it on the floor. I guess I haven't tried. I'm guessing they could even throw it on the floor. And the quality of the picture, it may not show here because I've zoomed in, but it's quite good. And certainly good enough to organize an exhibit if you wanted to. And plus, I mean, they're very whimsical. The kids just, they like them, and they're easy to work around, or work with, I should say. I've put in here a table of a paper from Wehrmeyer and colleagues that I really, really like. It's a neat study that they did with undergraduate students, so not with kids, where they actually used, again, that's where I got the idea of, they used photo voice in a group therapy setting for anxiety disorders. And so every participant, they would alternate between, like, traditional therapy and photo voice, or therapy based on the pictures. And the participants were asked to take pictures of different themes that represented their anxieties, basically. And the reason why I put it on the slide is that I wanted you to see the table. So they use the SHOWed technique. We don't use it, we use it, sometimes not all the questions are relevant, so you adapt it to what you need to discuss with your client, obviously. But I kind of like asking, so I get same thing for even the Legos or any other work of art. What is shown? What's really happening? How does it relate to you? Why did you choose to take that specific picture, or to show us that specific picture? Why are things this way? how could this educate people? Again, depending on what the aims of your therapy or your meetings are, and what should be done about it. Okay, moving on to sculpture. So again, I've tried to put in as many different types of art as possible, but if you have questions, really don't hesitate to stop me. So this winter we went into the schools and we offered the teachers, and teachers spoke to their students, what types of art were more appealing to them, basically. And they chose sculpture. I was kind of surprised by it, but they wanted to do some sculpture. So, and sculpture that wasn't Legos, but really sculpture for sculpture's sake, I guess. And so we did an activity of sculpting your safe space, sorry. And so here you have on the slide like a small introduction-ish, like what is a safe space? Do you have one? If they don't have one, they can imagine one. And then I'm not very good at I'm good at putting boundaries, but if the kid wants to, for example, sculpt a dog instead of sculpting their safe space, I'm more than okay with it. I'm not going to be the one saying, no, you were supposed to do a room. Like that's not, of course, that's not the point of the activity, right? So as you can see on here, we usually use Play-Doh. Play-Doh that we don't let the kids keep the Play-Doh because that would be quite expensive on the Play-Doh front. And then of course, as you can see on there, sometimes the Play-Doh is really neat at the beginning of the project, and then as it goes along, it becomes more brownish as the colors kind of go together. We use pipe cleaners, they're super cheap, and the kids kind of like playing around with them. And that if they do stuff with pipe cleaners, we let them keep them. That's not a problem. I'm sure you already knew about it, but like we keep the Legos as well, right? Because that would be super expensive. So as you can see here, like two different examples. One kid sculpted a dog with different materials, right? So toilet paper rolls, empty toilet paper rolls, and pipe cleaners. Another one actually sculpted kind of an actual safe space with two people talking, which I found was kind of neat as well. In terms of mandala, sorry, I'm looking at time and then thinking of two things at once. So moving on, I've done some research on nature therapy as well, and bringing the arts outside. It fits nicely with the line of research on eco-anxiety and the importance of nature. Some activities are harder than others to do outside, especially in Quebec where I live, because same I think as you, Lindsay, but we have an actual winter. So there's snow outside during the winter. Sometimes it gets very cold. It's not always ideal. But in the summertime, fall, spring, you can do a lot of neat activities with the kids outside. And as you can see on this picture, clearly it was the fall because you have different colors of leaves that have been used by the kids to create their mandala. So one activity that I really, really like doing, and that always is kind of a great hit, I would say, is doing those mandalas outside. Of course, if it's raining or anything, you can do it with objects that you have inside in your office or whatever. It's just not maybe as pretty, I would say. But usually we go outside, we ask them to basically find stuff on the floor. And word of caution, depending on where you work, in which schools and what areas, stuff on the floor, you may have to discuss with your clients ahead of time not to pick up stuff that is not from nature. You could bring even like a garbage bag or some gloves if you think you might have to pick up some garbage as you go along. But in any case, we ask them to find natural objects and to create a mandala. In terms of instructions, if you want to, you can start by explaining what a mandala is. A lot of the kids kind of know, but they're not super certain. I was going to say the important part is that it's symmetrical. Again, is it important? Maybe not, because I'm more interested in what they're going to be creating than whether it's symmetrical or not. But sometimes we do work with the teachers, and the teachers see an opportunity to do some math while we do the art, right? So that's a good example of the symmetry concept. But essentially, a mandala is an ancient form of art in which we make symmetrical work of art in the form of a circle. Again, it could be a triangle. I honestly do not care. I care much more about what they're going to be creating. So you can instruct the kids to look on the ground to find objects. Or like if you have a park near the school or a little forest, or I'm not too close. You could ask them to look on the ground to find objects such as pine cones, branches, dead leaves, rocks, basically anything that comes from nature. One very important rule, and every time I give trainings about this and I use this picture because it's pretty, I contradict my own rule. So one very important rule would be not to hurt nature around us. So we don't want them to actually pick flowers, right? We don't want them to pick leaves in the trees or break branches or anything. But then again, if you look at my picture, clearly the kids used some flowers that were not on the floor to begin with. I guess we could get into an existential debate about whether dandelions it's okay or not to pick, but in essence, you want the kids to at least understand not to break branches off of trees, right? It's really supposed to be based on what you can find on the ground. And a little tip, if it's windy outside, try to remind the kids that they can bring rocks to actually keep things into place. So this activity is really neat. The kids really like it. It's very creative. And I even gave a training to school psychologists in Montreal at the end of the month of March. So it was still kind of winter-ish, beginning of spring. And I was thinking, I'm not too sure what we're going to find outside to do mandalas, but they were able to find, some branches, some remaining pine cones from the previous fall and rocks and stuff. And it was kind of really neat. So I would say, regardless of the season, you can do something interesting with it. Are there any questions? Because I can see 14 on the chat thing, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, we were having a little bit of a conversation, but one question, and you may have said this, Catherine, is when you're using this technique, is this an opportunity for youth to collaborate, or is, what is the hope as far as sort of the therapeutic outcome?
For mandalas specifically? Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, that may be one of the few activities where like the therapeutic intent is maybe not as clear. So thank you for asking the question. As I said, we do things in group formats, right? So we split them up into smaller groups. They go together, they figure things out, they collect some things, and then they do the mandala together. So yeah, the team building skills or social skills, that would be a good example of that. Because it's not related, we're not going to talk about anxiety or depression or stuff like that when we do the mandala activity specifically. So yeah, it's a good point. But you could just do it, if you need to build therapeutic alliance with your client, it could be a nice introductory activity, not threatening. We're not talking about anything too intense. You could go outside with your client, just kind of build it together and see how they interact with you. It could provide you with a lot of information still. Okay, moving on to another type of art, dancing. So I will be very honest here. Dancing and me, they do not make one. They do not make two. I don't know how to say that in English. I'm sorry. I'm way too self-conscious to be able to dance in front of other people. I'll be quite honest here. So I'm going to say, if you're not comfortable dancing your emotions, maybe don't skip that activity, right? Or take it as a challenge and do it with the kid and say, I'm not comfortable either. We're going to get through this and we're going to learn something through it. But it may be one of the activities where it kind of involves commitment from the person, from the psychologist, from the psychologist end. However, we found that the kids really, really like to dance much more than we would have expected. I guess it depends on the age that you're working with. We work with the younger, so we don't work in high schools as much. We really work in elementary schools, and they really don't care at that point. They like dancing and they don't mind dancing in front of other people. I'm not too sure we would have the same reaction in high school. So again, you can adapt to your context. But the point of dancing your emotions is to introduce various emotions, so the vocabulary also pertaining to these emotions, and then to try to figure out some moves that could represent this variety of emotion. I want to just do a quick shout out to my colleague, Adriana Mendrick, who is a colleague of mine at Bishop's, and she's trained at the Ballet Academy on dance therapy and stuff. So she has helped us work things out for the kids. And it can be done with different types of music. I guess it could be even done with no music at all. We use music because it's easier that way. And then we can ask the kids for some moves that they think would belong in different categories. So the next slide has YouTube links, but for example, you can be dancing joy, anger, fear, sadness, any emotion really. So usually we would, in a group setting, we would divide it into two phases. First being, we put on some music for every emotion that we choose, and then we ask the kids to dance a few minutes together, thinking of moves that would fit with the emotion or with the music that we put on. And then in the second phase, if you have time, then kids can choose one emotion that they want to kind of delve further into. They want to examine in greater depth, and then create a short choreography, but really short, like 2-3 moves tops. And then they can tell us about why they chose that choreography, and usually have a really nice like empowerment effect in the kids who choose to do that activity. I guess I should have said from the get-go, like kids are never obliged to do any of the activities. If they don't feel like it, they can absolutely step out, like they don't have to do them. And it's especially true for dancing, or at least I think it's my own my own insecurities that transpire for this, because I thought we would have had a lot of kids not wanting to do this, and as I've said, they were really happy to do it. So maybe it's not as daunting as I think it is. And then again, it's just a few suggestions. I'm not going to open up the YouTube links, but I'll send the PowerPoint, so it's not a problem. But basically, for joy, I think I put the Pharrell Williams song "Happy." Right, it was an obvious choice. But sadness, anger, and fear, I don't remember them all, but it's classical music, trying to evoke an emotion. And then they can dance on that music. If the kids themselves have ideas, if you work in a school where you have a music program, I mean, you can absolutely take other ideas than those that I've provided. It's just like a basis if you want to try it out. Okay, back to sculpture. So sculpting your family. So as I said at the beginning, I would typically start not all of the therapy, like the therapeutic processes with every kid by drawing their family, but almost, because it's a good starting point to just to talk. Draw your family, tell me about your family. And in this case, we chose to go with the sculpture, with sculpting. Again, what is a family? That's a really neat philosophy for children question that you could even have. Like sometimes we use youth literature as well. So we'll use a book to kind of introduce the topic and think about it and then create. This is another line of research of mine that I'm really interested in how, but again, those are my different passions, but how can philosophy for children or existential therapy for kids, how can it actually feed the creative process? How can it influence what we create afterwards? So what is a family? How would you describe your family, right? And then if you're doing it in a group setting, of course you have different family types and different family structures, and that's very rich in terms of a discussion. You could do an hour just on that without even doing any creation whatsoever. And then once again, I put 2 examples on the slide, so one with Play-Doh and one with the pipe cleaners, but we asked them to sculpt their family and to think about the different members of their family that they want to put in to their sculpture. What do they look like? How would you want to sculpt them? Some will use both pipe cleaners and Play-Doh. I mean, they're not restricted to only one type of art medium. I'm sorry for lack of a better word. We're still good on time. Do you have any? So again, you can stop me if you have questions. We're good.
Yeah, just one quick question. As I'm watching these different techniques, some seem like they might lend themselves better to older elementary school students and others younger. Do you take that into account when you're thinking about the technique you use?
To be honest, not really. I found that they're pretty much, maybe except for this one for the haiku one, I wouldn't ask kindergartners to write a haiku, but we could compose a haiku and then I could be the one writing it down. No, like even in our philosophy for children research, was it like it needs certain like cognitive abilities, right? We still got really neat results and interest from like pre-K. So 4-year-olds wanting to talk about those topics, wanting to talk about death and stuff. So I don't typically, the age range doesn't really stop me. It will give different creations in the end for sure. There's going to be differences. But as I said, like I found that kids who are before kindergarten will often think more abstract in terms of art making, not in terms of their cognitive abilities. So they'll make some really cool stuff that, you know, that then we have to ask them to explain a bit more. It's not as obvious. And then once they go into school, it becomes more concrete in terms of what they draw or what they choose to sculpt. I work with a team of researchers in Scotland who do art therapy with babies. I find it absolutely amazing. Like they do stuff for like with parenting. Of course, the parents are there, but to me, that's like, oh wow, that's awesome. Like they actually take the babies, they give them paint, and they're like, let's go, do something with it, and then they evaluate communication abilities and attachment and stuff with their parents. And it blows my mind. But it wouldn't stop me to answer your question in short. Yeah, okay, so
one more quick question.
oh yeah,
There was a question in the chat. Just going back to the Mandela example. How do you handle a child who does not or cannot follow the rules, such as like refraining from picking flowers, or doesn't follow the purpose of the exercise, makes a truck rather than a self-image, for instance? You want to keep it positive. So how rigid are you, especially in a group?
So as I would say, I'm not rigid at all. It's a quality and a flaw for me specifically. So I would not be rigid. I would ask them to tell me about like, why did they draw or create a truck, and then just see where it leads me. In terms of group settings, we really work hand in hand with the teachers, right? So the teachers don't leave when we get into the classrooms and do the activities. We ask them to stay. So first of all, usually teachers are interested in seeing what we're going to be doing with them, but also teachers can take care of the discipline side of things, which I don't think it's our role as psychologists to take care of that. I don't want to have that role when I go into the classrooms, or even when I'm doing private practice. I don't want to be doing discipline at all. And I usually don't have to do it that much. So when we're in the classrooms or in group settings, typically we're going to have the teacher present. If you have a group therapy setting where a teacher wouldn't be there, oftentimes maybe you'll be two psychologists or two colleagues working together, and then one can lead the activity, the other one can take care a bit more of that part. But I wouldn't be shy if I see a kid tearing up a branch, I wouldn't be shy to just reiterate the rule and explain why, and like without getting angry or anything, but just kind of reiterating the boundaries, the same way that you would reiterate clear boundaries in your therapeutic context. Okay, so if we move on to creative writing and bibliotherapy. So again, just a different form of creative expression. I won't talk much about bibliotherapy, but basically using youth literature to discuss different topics, right? Or you can have them write a story to discuss different topics. And again, it works well with philosophy for children. We often use youth literature to bring different topics that we want to talk about. And I'm sure you're not learning anything from me when I'm saying that, but and the possibilities in English are so cool. They're endless in terms of youth literature. You have books for every topic. In French, it's not always the case. But yeah, I'm amazed at what exists in terms of youth literature in English. In any case, if we get back to creative writing, what we like to do is haiku exercises. So again, you can kind of do a little bit of an introduction, because maybe not all kids know what a haiku actually is. It's a form of Japanese poetry. They're very short poems of 3 lines that usually don't rhyme, so you can get that out of the way from the get-go. They used to describe things in nature. You could do that if you want to explore that theme with the kids. but nowadays people write haikus on anything they like. So you can do it like an open activity, or you can ask them to write a haiku on a specific theme. And I never put pressure as to, well, first of all, rhyming, because it's not part of haikus, but like typically haikus have a specific structure. So either a 3-5-3 word structure or a 7-5-7 syllables, I think. I never go down that road. Like, unless maybe you work in high school, then you want to kind of added an additional challenge to it, but I'm just really happy when they write poetry. That's all I'm looking for at this point. So 3 lines, that's what I'm asking for. And then if they have the time, they can illustrate their haiku afterwards if they want. And then I really like this book. It's called I Haiku You. So this is an example. I found it really cool. It's quite clear to me after hanging out with you, we're friends at first sight. That was awesome. So there you go. It's really important that for the haiku activity, it can be daunting if, again, if you get lost into the specificities of a haiku, or you want to explain what a haiku, like, I would keep it really simple and ask them to write very short poems of 3 lines. And I think if you go down that route, it will go super well. If you ask them to count the syllables and stuff, then it becomes kind of difficult, and it becomes more of like an academic task, which is not what you're aiming for anyway. So the full I Haiku You is on YouTube. Someone is reading it, so you can actually look at it. It can be a nice introductory activity as to what a haiku is. And then you have excerpts as well, so you can have both. Okay, moving on, we're getting back to sculpting with Legos. So this was a really cool activity that we did this year where, well, it was cool because what came out of it was really cool in terms of like going a non-threatening route, kind of. So we're going to talk about fear, or we're going to talk about anxiety, or we may have to talk about phobias, depending on your context. But we're going to use Legos to do so. So we're asking them. So again, you can start off with what is fear, what scares you. You can do some philosophy for children if you want with that. But the essence of the activity is that today we're going to be using Legos to create something scary. And then, of course, you can talk with your client as to what they chose to create, why they chose to create, and then you're going to have so much information about what scares them. And then you can open up on like a nice conversation, and then even segue into, if, for example, you're doing CBT, segue into how to introduce some exercises so that the fear or the anxiety can go down a bit, or what anxiety is, or how our brains process fear, etc. Oh, I'm almost done. Oh, that's good. Okay, I'm on time. I want to finish very quickly on eco-anxiety, because I did mention at the beginning that I also have a line of research on arts, well, and it's still mental health, and eco-anxiety specifically. As we advance in years, there is more and more people who are affected by climate change, right? Either directly or indirectly. I think maybe you've heard from it in the news, even in the States, but there are huge forest fires in Quebec right now, and New York was in, I don't know if some of you are from New York, but we're in a very deep fog from the forest fires in Montreal. So I live near Montreal. Over the weekend, we were told to close all the windows because the air quality, Montreal was at the top of the world for the worst air quality, which is very unusual for us. All this to say, I don't live near, like, I can't be flooded and where I live. I don't live in a forest, so there's no danger of a forest fire or anything, but I still suffer indirect consequences of climate change. For example, on days where the air quality is really bad, right? So more and more the kids are very much aware of this happening, and they are asking questions about it. All of this to say, you can use art to discuss issues related to climate change or eco-anxiety. The example that you have here, we had asked the kid to do a drawing of what they think the Earth will look like in 50 years. This one, clearly that kid was eco-anxious. Not all the kids are. And it's a very fine balance in terms of, you don't want to create anxiety in those kids. You just want to be able to answer their questions if they have some. So other drawings will not be as dramatic as this one, for example. Photo Voice is another nice avenue to explore climate change. And then we often ask the kids to kind of come together and either paint a group mural, or we can do like a very big puzzle and then cut out different big puzzle pieces, and every kid will take care of one puzzle piece and we'll put it together to like have a group mural at the end or stuff like that. And again, instilling hope is important when, like, it's not the topic for today's talk, but when we talk about eco-anxiety, we have to keep in mind the hope part of it. And so in the art, like, let's say you start by drawing of the earth in 50 years, make sure you finish with something around the theme of the beauty of nature, so that they're not left with thinking that all is doomed, right? That then it's counterproductive. And that's it. That was a sculpture of someone's safe space, and I thought it was neat that they kind of sculpted like being on the beach under a palm tree. But yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We are so grateful for you sharing these ideas and a little bit about your research. I welcome attendees' questions. I'm happy to read them if you want to type them out, or feel free to raise your hand and you can unmute and ask Catherine yourself. We did have a question in the chat. Wondering if you're associated with a specific school system and if there's time scheduled into your day for these activities.
No, so we work with different school boards across the province. We're not like we have some near the university where I work, but we have some schools that are quite far away from where I live, where I work. Usually, so to answer the question as to, is there like a specific period in the day for arts? Not usually. In the Quebec system, we have a class that is called ethics and culture something. I'm trying to translate, but usually, like, when we do philosophy for children and even art, because it's based in discussion as well, that's kind of where it fits nicely. So the teachers will reserve that period. Instead of teaching something more formal, then we'll come in that period of time to do the art intervention. We're actually, like, I'm very grateful and lucky to have such amazing partners in the schools. Like, I don't recruit actively new schools. I don't have to send out like emails saying, are you interested in, like, usually the schools that I've been working with they have a need. So they'll see that there's a need in their student population where there's a need for mental health intervention. And then they'll contact me saying, do you want to come in and do some arts with us? So the time that needs to be reserved for that, usually I'm not forcing anyone into it. They will find the time for us to come in and do the activities, because they find that there's a need in their students to be like to have mental health prevention stuff going on.
Thank you. We have a hand, Stacy.
Hi, thank you. This was a great presentation, first of all. So I'm running some social emotional groups at a camp starting next week.
Cool.
So I'm going to steal a few of these.
Yeah, definitely do.
Yeah. But my question is more related to, like, when doing these activities with with students in an individual setting, I guess, like, to what degree have you, or maybe like, would you recommend engaging in the activity sort of parallel with the students? So like self-portraits and things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. I found
I would do it. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, I found that, like, when I try and do art activities with kids and don't do anything, that, like, that is very uncomfortable. They're rushing, they're trying to, like, they're feeling like you're waiting. But then
and
other
it's intimidating.
times,
like
yeah,
someone's looking over your shoulder.
yeah. But other times I feel like sometimes if I'm doing it the same, they're like referencing what I'm doing. And so I worried, I guess, that maybe it's influencing their final product. But
that's a good insight. I would say that in a group setting, it's not as dramatic, because usually they'll just start and go ahead, and then I'll walk around. I won't really create anything in a group setting. I'm gonna walk around and ask them what they're doing. And if it's a one-on-one setting, you're totally right. So when I ask them to draw a family, for example, I'll draw my own family as we go along, but then I'll purposefully not make it very nice. Well, I mean, I'm not very good at drawing anyways, but just so they don't feel like I'm doing this work of art if they're not. But I'm just very open about it, right? So I'm going to tell them I'm not very good at drawing, but I can. And usually with kids, so I guess it depends on where you stand on self-disclosure, but I found that working with kids, you cannot be against self-disclosure. It just doesn't work. Kids have a million questions to ask you, and I don't mind sharing with them when they, like, I don't necessarily share with them without them asking about it, but like I have 3 kids and they'll ask me what age they are and I'll talk about them. So if I draw my family and they ask questions on my family, I'm happy to answer them. And then I can tell them, like, I'm drawing my family, but that's the way that I want to draw it. But you can do whatever you want with your drawing. I'm not imposing, as you were saying, like, I'm not imposing a way to do stuff. And then it also tells you something, right? If you have a kid that's too anxious to draw their family and is waiting to see how to draw their family, then there's material there to go kind of delve it deeper into, to ask, like, to figure out what is making them anxious. And then you can reassure them, of course, but I find that everything is kind of precious information in terms of understanding the kid that is in front of you.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Have you had students become dysregulated when creating something they fear?
No, not this year. Again, like, I guess it depends on the setting, right? So if you have a kid in like private practice or in your office and on phobia, like for a specific topic of phobia, then maybe you want to, I'm not sure the first week I would ask them, okay, let's create a sculpture of your phobia. But it hasn't happened to me. In like a prevention setting, they're actually often very happy to make it as scary as possible, and then kind of a competition between kids as to like who will be able to do the scariest Lego or stuff like that. So we don't usually have dysregulation happening. I did many years of mindfulness before switching gears, and so we did a lot of group sharing as well. And you can always kind of spot the little anxious ones, right? Just like the way they share after in the group setting, the way like their reflections, their introspection is always kind of out there, like much more advanced than the non-anxious kids. So if you do more than a week of art intervention and you see that you may have one of the kids who may be a bit more vulnerable, then you may just like know it in advance and then make sure that they're okay while you're doing the activity and repeating that they don't have to do it if they don't. But it hasn't really happened. What happens is, as you were saying earlier, Lindsay, like sometimes if someone doesn't want to sculpt fear, they might sculpt a truck. And okay, so I can ask them why, and maybe the answer won't be super insightful, but then I can say, okay, so maybe that theme was too difficult and they just didn't want to go there. And then I'll respect that. I won't force it or anything.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
One of the questions in the chat is referencing the attendees' experience working in schools, for instance, where accountability and evidence-based results are emphasized. The question is, how do you use data to justify the expense and time to the schools? I'm going to add a sub-question is, do you have to, in your line of work or your relationship with your partner schools, being that you're in Canada and in the United States, we have we do have an emphasis on this like data-driven, evidence-based process to our work. And is that the same for you? And do you feel like you have to justify doing this work?
Well, okay, so first of all, in terms of expenses, I have research funds. I'm very lucky, again, very grateful. So they don't have a penny to spend. Like I bring the material, and some of the material the kids keep. So it's not the worst expense that can be expected in my research is sometimes they have to print out questionnaires, and so it's going to be the paper expense. But even that, more and more, like I was trained very purely quantitative, so it kind of answers your evidence-based questions as well, right? I do evidence-based research, I do quantitative research, so usually I don't have those types of questions, but more and more, I have to say, I'm getting interested into mixed methods and qualitative research as well, because I think it brings a richness that questionnaires don't always bring, especially working with kids. But still, I don't have these types of questions, to be super honest. And as I mentioned, I don't have to look actively for partners that kind of fall to me. So again, I'm very grateful. So usually they want me to go into school and take some time and help out with mental health issues. So I don't know what it looks like in the States, to be very honest, but in Quebec, and first of all, the pandemic had a really big impact on mental health. I mean, the kids are not doing so badly, but still you can see that there are some mental health issues lurking. And so there's a need to go into the schools. And then there's not a ton of school psychologists in Quebec. And a lot of schools don't have services in psychology. And that's kind of what I'm offering them. Of course, I don't lead all the groups anymore because I couldn't. I have too many projects, but I have students, graduate students, doctoral students in clinical psych. So it's basically like having an hour of psychology for a class, not for one kid, but for a class once a week. So usually they're pretty happy about it, I would say.
That's wonderful. I think we have time for just one more question. If anyone has one before we end.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Or Catherine, if you have any sort of concluding comments, just a little bit of housekeeping. Again, there's a survey that I will send you if you're looking for continuing ed's credit, and then I will send the certificate. But any remaining questions, or Catherine, any concluding thoughts?
Again, thank you so much for coming. That's what I have to say. I'm really happy it went well. I'm very honored that I was able to give this webinar. We do a lot of research. If you're interested, if you're working in a school and you want to do research with us, you can email me. I will be more than happy to hear from you. If you have any questions whatsoever about the presentation, and you want to email me as well, please feel free to do so. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Yeah, don't hesitate. Yeah, and I'm able to write in English as well. So I won't be answering in French. It'll be fine. We'll be able to understand each other. So yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Would you be able to add it to the chat?
Oh yes, I'll type it in right away.
That'd be
It's going to be easier. I was wondering, I don't think it's on my slides actually. And I'll send you the slides. I'll send it as a PDF just because the pictures make the file so heavy that I don't think I'll be able to send the PowerPoint.
And I'll be happy to distribute to all who attended. Thank you all so much again for being here, and we'll stay on for a minute or two, but feel free to head out, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.